But also, we are going to hear firsthand this morning what God is doing with one of our mission partners. We have got Phil and Rachel Bowyer with us. Should we give them a cheer? Yeah. They're working in South Africa, in Durban, and they're doing incredible things there with Soul Action. So let's give them another cheer as they come and speak to us.
Thank you. I just wanted to say right at the beginning, thank you so much for this opportunity to share. You have a beautiful, beautiful church. I was really, overwhelmed by it during communion. It's such an amazing space, and just the presence of God is so thick here, so present. It's incredible. So thank you. We feel really privileged to be able to be here. I wanted to share our story. We're just kind of normal people trying to work out what God's doing in our lives. Just before the meeting, somebody prayed, if they can do it through those people, then they can do it through anybody. And that's how it feels. We're just normal people trying to hear God and do what he says. And so just a little bit of my story before we get into where we are. I used to work for a relief and development agency in the UK. And I used to edit magazines and write books and speak at conferences. And then Chuck said something that just really made me think about my integrity. I don't know if he does that to you. As a direct result of that challenge, I heard God say to me, I needed to go. Stop talking about it. Stop writing about it. Stop telling other people to do it and go and do it yourself. And that happened in 2005 or 6, I think. And by 2007, we were in South Africa as a family, the three of us. And we were in the east coast of South Africa, a little bit like you. It was beautiful this morning driving past the sea. It reminded me of home. When we arrived in South Africa, God spoke to us really very clearly again. And he said, do nothing. And I'm like, what? I've given up my job. I've left my family. I've given up my career. I've left the church we were leading. And you're telling me now to do nothing? I got really angry with God. But I resorted to prayer, which is probably better than anger. And as we were praying as a family, what do you mean do nothing? It eventually emerged that what he was saying and what I hadn't really understood was do nothing new. Don't go and start a new project. Go and do something that you think is kind of going to give you value. Go and find out what already exists. And then as you do that, you'll discover what my will for your life is. And so that's what we did. We jumped in our little Renault Clio, and we just drove 100 kilometers from where we lived in a kind of a semicircle. We couldn't go the whole circle because that would be the ocean. But 100 kilometers, and we just met and sat with people, and we heard their story. We just sat and we listened for hours. And sometimes we cried for hours after we heard their story. And we kind of found stuff we expected. HIV and AIDS is a huge problem in South Africa. In Durban, it's regarded by some as the epicenter of the African problem. We heard about stories of abuse. Again, we weren't surprised by that. We heard about orphans and vulnerable children in child-hated households. Again, we weren't particularly surprised by that. But what did surprise us was the other stuff. Not what people saw, the poverty they saw, or how they were responding to it, but how they actually felt. We sat there with church leaders, charity leaders, government leaders, community leaders, and almost every single one said, I'm so exhausted. I'm so frustrated. I'm so isolated. Do you know, I'm the only person in my church who's doing this. And we were able to say, do you know what? We can understand why you feel exhausted, and we can understand why you feel frustrated, and we can even understand why you feel isolated, but you're not the only person doing this. We've met 200 projects in this city doing what you're doing, and we've met 2,000 people doing what you're doing, and they're serving 80,000 people in this city. So even though those feelings are real, they're not actually true. You're not the only person doing this. And so God spoke to us again. Just get them in the same room. Get them in the same room, and I'll do the rest. And so that's what we did. We just gathered leaders together, and we began to connect them with one another and connect them to God. We began to offer training to build their capacity, and we began to pray together. And not the normal prayer where we tell God what we think, but the kind of prayer where we say, God, what do you think? And we just sat there in silence, and we just asked God to reveal himself to us and to speak to us. And we did that over and over again. I don't know what slide we're on. Next slide. And I'm just going to want to share one quick story before Rachel talks about something else. As we began to pray, new stuff started happening. And we met 5 different leaders who each talked to us about human trafficking separately. And again, God says, just get them in the same room. And we kept meeting and praying, and nothing really much happened. God just spoke to us about it will emerge, it will come, be patient, don't push anything. And eventually, those 5 conversations just exploded over a period of 2 years into this graphic, which doesn't mean anything to you. Next one, please. Click. All these connections from 5 people praying. And we saw films being made about human trafficking. We saw petitions being handed into government to address modern slavery. We saw people get jobs. We saw people donate tools, and then donated tools for this next thing, which was really amazing. Next slide, please. We saw women who were previously worked on the street for a living, so survivors of human trafficking. We saw them beginning to pick up fallen nature, bits of bark and tree that just was discarded and people walked by, and begin to make jewelry out of this fallen nature, restoring the beauty that used to be there, and actually begin to sell that jewelry in the shops, even in the UK. And it was a beautiful story of almost like God in parallel. You've got women who used to work in those streets being restored through having an opportunity and potential being restored. And you've got nature being restored at the same time. And it all came through prayer. Praying, what do you want us to do? Eventually I'm going to wrap up very quickly. Eventually we moved on, and we began to imagine, well, if that's how one group of women can benefit from that, how can the other projects that we work with? And God said to us, imagine a market. So imagine a market where the people and the projects and the churches you work with can actually showcase their skills and their expertise and their gifting, and people can purchase that stuff and not only have stuff in their house, but actually be educated about poverty and people's potential in our city. And what we'd really like your prayers for is this next thing. We don't know what the next thing is. We run a market like a couple of times a year, but it's not enough. It's not going to be sustainable to keep people off the streets. And so we really would value your prayer as a church and churches. What is the next thing for us? Is it a shop? Is it an online thing? Or we don't really know. So we just really value prayer for that. What is the next thing? Rachel's just going to come and talk briefly about education. Thanks.
Good morning. One of the gaps we saw when we were visiting people was education. So even though we're like 20 years after apartheid in South Africa, inequality still exists. And the kind of education you receive not only depends on where you live, but on how much you can afford on school fees. And in the last few years, schools within township areas have been made no-fee paying schools, which means those children have access to free education. But in those schools, class sizes vary from 50 children to 90 children in a class. And so there's one teacher with those 50 to 90 children, and there's very few resources, and the infrastructure is very poor. Primarily in those classes, the children are taught in their home language. So where we live, that's isiZulu. So the first 3 years of school, they're taught in Zulu, and then in the 4th year of schooling, they're expected to change to be taught in English. So all the subjects will be taught in English other than Zulu. So it's a major challenge for teachers and for the children. And we believe that by giving children the skills to read and write, that will lead them to develop into the people that God intended them to be. In South Africa, learning to read and write in English is a key life skill. And that's where we partner with schools. So we've developed a skills development program and work with teachers. We provide workshops at the beginning of terms. In South Africa, we have 4 school terms. So we do workshops at the beginning of every term. And then we go into the classrooms to provide the assistance they need to actually put that into practice. So people in South Africa love workshops, but that doesn't actually change anything. They will just keep coming to workshops and nothing will change. So we go into the classrooms and we help them to actually put into practice what they are learning. And over this year, we've worked with 17 teachers, and it's been amazing to see their progress. They've gone from a rote way of teaching to a multisensory approach. And they're now asking us, like we are teaching them how to teach English, they're now asking us, how can we help them to teach their mother tongue, how to teach Zulu. Now, I don't speak any Zulu whatsoever, but they're very keen for this to happen in January, so it will, because they want it to happen. So I suppose my prayers would be that you would pray for wisdom for me as I need to think about how do we do that, how do we make it appropriate. This is their mother tongue. They know how to speak it, but they need help in teaching it.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that we as a family, and Zach's here as well, we really are so grateful for your support, and not just finance, but the actual, to know there's churches around the country that are praying for us and thinking of us and have us in mind. It's incredible. And you know, that picture I showed, you're part of that story somewhere towards the north, you know? And so thank you so much. Please keep praying for us and please keep thinking. And I just wanted to encourage you that if God says something to you and it doesn't make sense, just have a go anyway. Because most of the time, whatever God says, it does not make sense. But we just take the next step and slowly, as we continue to wait and listen and respond, stuff happens. His kingdom comes and lives are changed and transformation is happening in our city just by that simple obedience of responding to God's voice.